Okay, welcome to Hopeifiers. You look and say, hey, where is Brother Scott? And that is my question too. I'm sure he'll be along shortly. So he said that what we're going to chat about today was about hope and nutrition. And that has piqued my interest. And it makes sense that there's some foods that you make you feel more hopeful, make you feel more just kind of alive and in tune with life. So that might be very interesting. But while he's not here yet, or while we're waiting for him, I was thinking today, and I'll share this with you and see what you think of it here. My day job is to help caring employers set up benefit plans for their employees. And in that process, part of what I do is communicate to the employees about their benefits. Here's what is covered, here's how you access it, here's how you get the best value out of it. So now, what I'm thinking that might be of value when I'm in front of people and telling them about their benefits is also encourage them to use their benefits, especially their mental health benefits, in more of a proactive fashion. So instead of basically saying, waiting until something, I'm in the midst of depression, or that I have a marital breakdown, or there's something that's happened, some horrible thing in my life that has occurred, then basically I kind of use my mental health resources in order to enhance my personal growth and development now. And part of that I think is really valuable is that there seems to be a universal type of situation where people, hey Scott, how you doing?
Hi Alan, how are you?
Good. I was just doing a little introduction, then we'll get right to you. Okay.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm a little bit late, everyone. Go ahead,
That's
Al.
okay. This is actually related to the thing I sent that I'm sure you haven't had a chance to read yet. So just saying about to our viewers about the thought is about when I'm presenting to a group of employees, that also team members, that also perhaps I can share with them how they might use their benefits in more of a proactive way. So in order to kind of a thrive, as opposed to kind of wait till the wheels fall off and then access those benefits. And my thought is specifically about using the mental health benefits to kind of grow and develop and to kind of further your growth and development. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm just kind of sharing that with our audience and with you. Once you get a chance to read that thing that I sent you over, that's what I'm thinking of incorporating in or providing for messaging for people when I am talking about their employee benefits.
I did have a chance to look at it, Al, and looked really good. I think it's an excellent idea, and we'll be able to talk about it more. But I think it's a great segue into tonight's show too. So,
well, let's get on tonight's show. Hope
okay,
and
great.
nutrition.
Yeah, it's a great topic, but one that most people are a little bit tired of hearing about. I know that when I grew up, there was what were they called? Not the Canadian participation, but there was a whole series of eat smart kind of things.
Yeah.
And there was lots of buzzwords like antioxidants, and I was convinced when I was a kid, I think that everything that was fun contained oxidants, and everything that was not fun and I didn't like to eat was somehow antioxidants. And you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But one of the things that we want to talk about tonight, I think, and focus on is how food and nutrition can greatly affect your ability to maintain positive mental health and a hopeful outlook on life and relationships and work and really everything in your life.
Yeah. And you probably did some research on this. You probably have some kind of study you're going to share. Is that correct?
I do. And I'm really hoping that we can include your dietary choices as well. I think that most of our listeners, unless they're tuning in for the first time, know that Alan has some time ago. How long have you been vegan now? Like, how long have you not been eating meat?
You know what? I always have mixed feelings about talking about this because I'm sure that I'm just like this far away from getting my Alberta citizenship revoked. You know what I'm saying? Drive an electric car, have solar panels, vegan. Oh my goodness. Like kick that guy out of the country, right? So, or at least out of the province. Anyways, I've probably been vegan now for, I'm going to say 5 years. Longer as vegetarian, but about vegan for 5 years now.
I can vouch for you though. You're a firearms instructor. You've got horses all over, and you feed them and look after them, even though you may not actually ride them that much. And a whole herd of cats. Cat herding is an Alberta tradition. Right?
So you're saying that we can still stay in Alberta. We're going to be all right. Our citizenship won't be revoked. Okay,
born and bred Albertan, I can say that you can stay.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the vote of confidence. So yeah.
Properties. But no, it is true. And I know that, I grew up on a beef farm, started out as a dairy first, and then we transitioned into a beef farm and raised and showed horses after that as I was growing up. And, beef was every meal. If you wanted a steak, just go to the freezer. There was everything you could want there. It was never a shortage in our home and we always had pork. We kept a few, back in my grandmother's time, pigs were called mortgage breakers because
mortgage breakers.
Yeah, well, mortgage savers. I don't know why they called them breakers, but they pigs are great because, of course, they reproduce quite quickly. The piglets can be raised up. They'll eat food other animals won't eat. They use protein and carbohydrates from almost anything, and gain weight, and then they can be either slaughtered for the use of the family or sold to help pay the mortgage. Right. That's
right. Oh, interesting.
Without having to kill the adult. Right. And where a cow has one calf, usually if they're twins, they don't usually survive. A pig can have 6, piglets quite easily. So, most farms around us kept a few pigs for consumption and, as a backup if somebody needed cataract surgery or the banker was in a particularly foul mood or whatever it was necessary for.
Hey, thinking of that, did you ever see that movie Babe, where the guy he teaches the pig to be the dog? That'll do. Pig.
I'm gonna get hate mail because I'm like the opposite of you. I grew up and we used to name the cows that we were going to butcher, and then when we sent them to the butcher, we would put their name on the meat so we knew
on the packages. Here's a package of hamburger from Lacey. How nice.
Yeah, well, Leia. It was Star Wars was big when I was a kid, so like Princess Leia was one of my cows, and I raised her up from she was a calf, and and she was good eating, and sounds almost cannibalistic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Your friend Leah that you've been eating for the last 6 months. Yeah.
But I grew up very much the ranch mentality. If you're going to have livestock, you're going to have dead stock. And critters are for eating. Of course, dogs.
And I grew up same way, right? I lived on a farm and we butchered things and I ate tons and tons of meat, right? It's just, and I realize there's different reasons why people change what they eat. Sometimes for health reasons, and sometimes it's for ethical reasons, sometimes it's for environmental reasons. But if you look at vegan, it hits all the boxes. For me, it does anyways, right? So, because nothing has to die. It makes me feel good that nothing has to die for me to live. So, and
that's positive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and people who eat meat don't enjoy death. I think that's, the argument. It's not like, I enjoyed the fact that Leah had to be killed and that her life was ended to feed us. But we grew up in the tradition that humans ate animals and plants. And in the same, we would harvest the grain and the hay. We would harvest the animals and we would use them to feed our bodies and care. And, we're a little bit off topic, but nobody loves their animals more than a rancher. And, maybe it's different in a big industrial farm. I don't know there. I've never worked on an industrial farm. I don't know. But, the animals in our farm were everything. We would put ourselves in harm's way to protect them, not just because they represented money, but, they were what was handed down to children. It's what paid for education. It's what paid for a roof over your head. The animals were absolutely your entire world and what they ate and their medicine. And, most ranchers are saying their their bulls or their cattle to the vet before they'll go to see the doctor themselves if there's a question over, who can we afford?
Yeah.
So, but what I want to talk about, and as you know, after my coma, I had my pituitary gland was fried. They didn't realize that caused me all sorts of problems, and ultimately, a lot of that has been dealt with by rebalancing my diet. Some of it by chemicals that I take in pill form and injection form, and some of it by changing my diet and the way I eat. So, our opinions tonight are not a replacement for professional dietary advice.
Definitely
if you
not.
have concerns, I just want to say this up front. If you have concerns about your diet, there's great people in our community that'll help you with that for free. At the hospital, most clinics offer, once a month or once every 2 months or whatever. All you have to do is talk to your general practitioner. I'm sure there's a government number that you can contact about nutrition. I don't happen to have that, but we can post it later for sure. Getting nutritional information is not hard to do. But what Al and I want to talk to you tonight is eating to help you stay positive and in a good mood and stay hopeful, right?
Yeah.
And there's been so much research now, and I'm really happy that there has been. When I was younger, I was really interested in Chinese medicine and herbal medicine from Asia. And I did a lot of research on it. And the criticism was always, well, this isn't science-based. Well, as you know, science is coming back around and saying, well, yeah, but there's a reason, these cultures live longer, live healthier, don't have a lot of the problems we do. So let's look at some of these traditional, I don't want to say remedies, because food is a medicine. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
We don't often think.
And I find it like you're getting to this, I know, but just to interject, the practices, I mean, there's some whole communities, some whole countries where, they'll rinse with this kind of tea, or this will be like a supplement that everybody in the whole country takes, right? Because that area has recognized the value for their folks, right? And I know now it seems to be like vitamin D, as an example, is like there. I don't think there's, well, pardon me, if you're in a country in Africa where you get lots of sunlight and you're out in that sunlight in not a whole bunch of clothes, you'll get enough vitamin D. But for you or I, no way we're going to get enough vitamin D unless we supplement, right? So
no. And another thing that I found really interesting when I was researching the minimum daily allowances or the maximum daily whatever, a lot of them are best guesses, and there is no conclusive evidence that that's an appropriate amount. Now, I'm not recommending people go out there and ignore them or abuse them. Just be aware that, growing up, I thought they were like the 10 commandments of science. I thought, the FDA or the Canadian Food Guide was somehow the ultimate researched, everything was written in stone. That was it. It's not, as you know. No.
And the variances, our bodies have variances, right? Even though there is a range, right? We got this little bell curve and they say from here to here is normal, but you could be normal and be out here. And that's just how your body works, right? It's got, 27 milliliters over decimeter of X, because that's what your body needs for it to function, right? That doesn't mean it's bad. That just means it's out of the norm, right?
Body temperature, how the mark for a fever. A lot of people, you have to know your own normal body temperature. I have a colder body temperature, which you wouldn't expect given that I'm larger than most people. But for me, a fever is actually 1.8 degrees lower than the recommended temperature, because my body runs at a lower temperature than is their normal. And a lot of people run higher, or a lot of people run lower.
Yeah.
So
there's variances.
We're individuals, right? And the trick to so many of the things we talk about is getting to know your individual needs as an organism, as a sentient being, as a spiritual being.
Right. And would you not agree? Awareness is what that comes to, right?
Absolutely.
Awareness where you're paying attention that you do this and you feel this. You eat this and you feel my energy. How is my energy level after that? How is my concentration? How did I have brain fog, right? Like that kind of a thing. So once you start being aware of that, those connections, then you start making better choices and right?
Well, and I'm going to lay some philosophy on you here. This is wisdom. Balance is the key, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is, and the but balance. We always depict balance as two scales being level.
Mm-hmm.
That's only balance if you're measuring two identical things,
That are
right?
static, that nothing's
Yeah,
changing. Yeah.
exactly. But balance could look like this, depending on what we have in the scales, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at individuals as representing that balance. So what's balance for me is not necessarily balance for you, or what's balance for you isn't necessarily balance for Corolla, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah.
agree
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that?
No, well, that's well said. Makes sense. Yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
And I think that for too long, we've talked about balance, and we've talked about, you just need to, be eat smart, but you have to do it for you, right?
Yeah.
And that applies to everything.
Yeah.
You're an individual, and your individual needs are different. But there are some guidelines, and we're going to talk about the biggest problem we have in North America, and arguable. And now I'm worried that I'm going to be like Danielle Smith and make a statement that people are going to haunt me with forever. The biggest problem we have is chronic inflammation,
Mm-hmm.
and that affects so many things in our body. It
Does.
affects, and it takes so many forms, and most people are really unaware. They think of inflammation as it has to be some swelling I can see. But as you know, and I know you're very much aware of this, that inflammation often occurs inside the body in tissues that we can't see or feel, but they have a profound effect on our health, our long-term health, our state of mind. A lot of research has been done recently, really groundbreaking research on how inflammatory foods that cause inflammation, are one of the pillars of the issues of mental health we're seeing in adolescents and young adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really quite surprised when I looked at these studies where they were, on average, if they, we talk about instant gratification, right? Like I take a pain pill, 20 minutes later, I don't feel the pain anymore, right? My blood pressure's too low, I take a pill, an hour later, my blood pressure's normal. My blood pressure's too high, I take a pill, an hour later, it's normal or fine. As nutrients don't work that way, but they're not as slow as we think. And two really big studies, it took an average of 3 weeks to see results in adolescents' diets affecting both their inflammation scores and their mood scores.
Mm-hmm.
So translating that to better mental health was only 3 weeks down the road. Now
Yeah.
that's not immediate, and especially today's generation. You and I grew up with modems that went beep boop beep boop boop and took 4 minutes to connect. And
Yeah.
if you wanted to look at a picture, that was you go make yourself a sandwich, let the dog out, come back, and it would still be slowly going. People today they want stuff happening like this. So 3
But
weeks.
the study you're referring to, just if I understand you correctly, you said after 3 weeks of changing what they eat, no medications or anything, then they had their inflammation markers drop significantly, and what their mental health improved, their mood improved. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can. This is out of it's the articles from the Newport Institute. They're a for-profit organization, but they're a gateway for a lot of clinical research. So if you follow it through, and I can put the ad or the links up, the noticeability, and I can't give it a scientific amount, but it was noticeable and significant
Mm-hmm.
after
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
And on scores of mood and general mental health, also significant changes after 3 weeks. So,
Well, I don't know if I told you this, but prior to trying more of a plant-based approach, I was the 2 double cheeseburgers at lunch in my car kind of guy, right? Eat them while you're driving down the road, and that, find the next garbage can and throw the wrappers in, away you go. So that's what I was doing. And there was this Rip Esselstyn, this big Texas firefighter triathlete guy that had a thing called the Engine Number 2 diet. And he said, try this for 30 days just to try this plant-based thing and see what you think. I was 2 weeks in, and one of the first things I noticed was an elevated mood. My mood had bumped up considerably in like 2 weeks. And so that was one of the first things I noticed, even before I noticed a lot of physical things. But the physical things, which you're talking about, inflammation, elbows, knees, shoulders, those kind of things, lots and lots of inflammation and lots of pain in those joints, to the degree that what a black badge course is.
yeah,
I was
absolutely.
trying to take a black badge course, and I was, I don't know, 45 or something, and I could not hold my arms were aching from trying to hold the pistol up to shoot it, right? That's not a problem anymore, but that's basically that flow of inflammation, of toxins. TMAO is the one that comes from meat, is a specific toxin that comes from meat that causes scads of inflammation, and lots of inflammation comes from sugar too, right? Huge source of inflammation. And where is it? In all your joints, in it messes with your microbiome, messes with like your gut permeability, affects your skin, like rashes, like eczema, that kind of thing, affects your mental capacities, including linkage to Alzheimer's because of inflammation, right? It's huge. Yeah.
Well, and the thing that scared me possibly the most was once you start researching inflammation in brain tissue, and so much, and we used to think it's not just our brain, our gut, as we call it, our stomach system, communicates with our brain a lot more than we thought it did, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's one of the problems I have with my pituitary out of the equation, or partially, whatever is going on. My gut and my brain weren't communicating. So my brain thought it was in starvation mode, and my gut wasn't relaying any of the information about what actually was going on to my brain. The transmitters, the process was interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at inflammation in brain tissue, when we look at, you talked about permeability, the ability for our body to transmit the signals it needs to find its balance become interrupted. One of the big things that have been looked at recently is magnesium. And most people, certainly a huge percentage of North Americans, we're talking in the 80s and 90s, are deficient in magnesium. And magnesium is critical for the communication of the neuropathic messages in our body. And that's just one example. But yeah, inflammation, and that's why I said that it's right now, I think that's one of the things that we face the most of. Because as you correctly said, red meat, processed meats, bacon, hot dogs, lunch meats, cured meats. This one always blows people away. Refined grains, and people always think that if it says ancient grains on the package, that it's safe and good for you. Not so. The packaging, and there's been lots of laws attempted and failed, and some passed to try and give us a better idea what's actually in the food we eat. But there's a really wealthy lobbyist industry, that's an industry with very powerful lobbyists, the food industry, the prepared food industry, that wants to make sure that we just keep buying food and don't really concern ourselves with what's in it.
Yeah.
Snack foods, almost all of your snack foods have inflammatory elements to them. Sodas and other sweetened drinks, corn syrup, as you know, all of the versions of fructose and
Yeah. Yeah.
all of those, and fried foods.
Yeah.
Fried foods have that added problem of being carcinogenic. We found that the fats we use to cook, once they're raised to a certain temperature, are very carcinogenic, and we're
Oh,
used to them.
what have you ever looked at the World Health Organization and their things about carcinogenic foods? Like barbecued meat, fried meat, meat like is number class 1 carcinogen, right? It's just like this will cause cancer. It's just a matter of whether your body's weak enough for it to start kicking in, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and refined sugar is another big one, and
Yeah.
there's lots of documentaries you can watch about it. But one of the things that really stood out with me is a bacteria, Candida, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which
I believe you are.
Yep, and it's a really, really nasty bacteria that we have. All of us have it in our stomach. I was Candida free for a short period of time. They used a drug of last resort, and they killed almost all the bacteria in my entire body. My hair all fell out, my skin all sloughed. It was terrible. And they call it a drug of last resort because our body needs those bacteria to live. So consequently, you kill the good ones with the bad ones. But it was the only chance they had to kill off this mutated bacteria that was killing me. And it almost killed me. Because, like I said, my hair was coming out in handfuls. It was like a horror movie. My skin just peeled off. My stomach was,
Wow.
they were feeding me through a tube. So, but Candida is really scary that it feeds on sugar, loves sugar, more refined in all its forms. Refined sugar feeds Candida. And Candida can move outside of your gut environment. And that's something that I just found out recently is that it can actually get into your urinary tract. If you're a woman, it can get into your reproductive system. I don't know about men. The studies I was reading didn't talk about if it could get into the urinary it can get into men's urinary tract and kidneys. I don't know if it can get into our reproductive system, but on women, it certainly can. And it's really, really bad for us. And it lives in all of us.
Yeah.
And it's like the old saying, right? We each have a dark wolf and a white wolf. And whichever wolf will become dominant is the one we feed the most.
Yeah, exactly. And that just related to that same thing. My understanding is if you have a diet where it's had a regular, large amounts of sugar on a regular basis, and that large amount of processed foods do the same thing because there's so much sugar in them. But anyways, the large amounts of processed foods or sugar, basically your microbiome changes, and they are starting to send messages up to your brain to say, hey, we need more sugar, like it's really an addictive cycle, right? That takes over. Because as you said, the bacteria and the parasites and the viruses, we're like 50 trillion cells, our body, human cells, but we are 500 trillion cells of bacteria and all of those other things that have to have a balance. We need it in us. We just got to get it in the right order, and that we're all kind of playing on the same team, right? So
when they use that drug of last resort, I mean, it killed off almost all the bacteria, good and bad, in my body. My fingernails fell out, like my eyelashes fell out, like it was horrible. Like it was like a horror movie.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. So I can say that we certainly need those good bacteria. But getting back to what you're talking about, the gut balance and how it can change our thinking. Part of the problem is that, again, marketing, probiotics, right? We're told that if we take probiotics, that it will help control these bad bacteria, and like yogurt's good for us, right? Well, if you go look in your fridge, it can say probiotics and organic and can mean absolutely nothing for your health. It can be full of sugar, it can contain dead bacteria that doesn't. And the studies I looked at said, yes, yogurt or fermented foods are a good source, but you need to switch them. If you're really serious about getting it from yogurt, you have to really read carefully. You should make your own, and you should switch varieties because you need.
Scott, I got to jump in here, buddy. In the last 3 weeks, I took a sauerkraut making course.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I love sauerkraut.
Oh yeah. And sauerkraut, huge probiotics. You're making a living culture, right?
Yeah.
And I made I'm in the process of making kombucha. And if
Oh,
with kombucha, do you know the SCOBY, what the SCOBY actually means? Do you know this?
yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's hang on, a a symbiotic culture of bacteria and
Oh,
yeast. That's
yeah.
what a SCOBY is, that
Yeah.
makes kombucha, that does all these amazing things for your microbiome.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I'm making homemade kombucha. I'm figuring out how to do it. This lovely Mandy is helping me figure it out, and I'm just loving this homemade kombucha stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, sauerkraut, kimchi. Almost every culture has a lot of fermented foods because it's something that our body needs, and it replaces those. And that gets back to what we were talking about in the beginning, how often traditional cultures incorporated these things that kept us healthy and allowed us to get to the point we are now,
Yes.
where now it's basically emergency science often that allows us to continue to live rather than good living, if you
Right.
will.
Yeah. It's not the all of the food that has bolstered your health and your wellness and your vitality. It's basically because of the processed foods that are beating the crap out of your body that you get sick, right? So what you're taking in to give you nutrition has very little nutrition, but a whole bunch of negative stuff associated with it, right? So, unfortunately, processed food, and you and I've talked about processed foods too, where the food manufacturers, the devious bastards they are, will actually put a person in a functional MRI machine to say, "Oh, taste on this. Oh, it lights up these circuits in your brain. These are really addictive circuits." Yeah, that's a keeper. We got to get that stuff out, right? So that's just it's unconscionable.
Part of the problem is right from the time we're children, and I don't know your history, but my mother is not well endowed. Anyway, she had a problem breastfeeding us,
Okay.
and so very quickly, yeah, I think I wear a bigger bra size than my mother does, but
All right.
um, that was a joke, Mom, if you're watching. Uh, yeah. Um, so we were bottle fed quite young, and only recently have they really looked at what goes into artificial milk that's getting fed to infants. And
Yeah.
one of the big ingredients is refined sugar in lots of forms. So basically, we grow up addicted to refined sugar and additives and all of these things. I remember when I brought the twins back, they were 2 years under 2, and I brought some formula back just in case they had problems with the food and whatever. I can't remember how old they were. Anyway, the formula I brought back set off the explosives detector.
Oh.
Yeah, so I've got the twins and myself, and this is when Dad was dying of cancer, and so I'm in the airport. I've got this luggage, and I've got the twins, and they're upset, and they're suddenly all these security people come out of nowhere because their explosive detector's gone off, and they went
Wow.
through all of my luggage, and it turned out to be the formula that I had
Mm,
brought with me. So I have
really?
no idea what's in formula that would set off an explosive detector, but they shook it around and played with it and took a sample of it. And yeah, so I don't
Wow.
know. Point is, though, is that we're addicted from a very young age in North
Yes,
America.
you are right. You're right. And I mean, just even in terms of, when I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, like my mom knew nothing about nutrition, but she knew what I liked. Did I like, candies? Did I like, ice cream? And of course, right? Well, I'm a kid. I want everything sweet. And she would just like, that would be the treat, right? That you would do. And then you basically, you do get that addiction. It kind of takes over your thing. I was 240 pounds when I was 12 years old.
Wow, that's
And I
amazing.
just because I just, whatever, food was always the comfort thing, right? That kind of thing. And I think the fatter I got, the more rejected I felt. And then the more I ate, or whatever kind of cycle I was in anyway. So actually the weight I am right now, this body hasn't had this weight since I was 11 years old. So
Wow. That's fantastic. I was a really skinny kid the whole, like, up until my 20s. And
Is
then
that
I
right? Eh?
started,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I was really slender. And, I
Well,
mean,
you probably worked your ass off too. Hey
yeah,
Scott,
I
where are
did.
we on
Yeah,
time? 34 minutes. Where are we? Where are we on our agenda,
we're
my
doing
friend?
okay. I was
Good.
I want to talk about, so we talked about inflammation
Yes.
and the causes of inflammation. Now I want to talk about um, foods that you should eat every day. And I want to comment on another thing that I've been researching recently, and that's how important the first meal of the day is. And we've been sort of preached to us all the time, oh, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, all of these things. But recently, I found out that one of the reasons it's really important is our gut brain system does a little bit of predictive analyzing. So
Mm,
whatever, literally breakfast means to break your fast. So it doesn't matter what your first, when if it's at 6 in the morning or noon, right? The first time after not eating for 8 hours, hopefully you're getting 8 hours sleep. Those of us that don't, pay for it. But that first meal that your body takes in, your body says, think of back when we were hunter gatherers and we would find like an orchard of peaches, a natural occurring orchard of peaches, and we would stuff ourselves with peaches, right? Our body says, okay, this is what we can expect today. So this is how we're going to balance things. We're going to store this food. We're going to, push this to this part of our body. We're going to take these nutrients out of it. And your brain guts basically creates a model for how it's going to deal with your next meals, assuming they're going to be similar in content to the one you just had, right?
mm-hmm. I
It,
see.
it makes sense. It's interesting and a developing way of looking at things. But one of the problems is when your body gets food that it doesn't recognize as food. And that's where we get to a lot of the processed and refined ingredients, preservatives and things that get in our food. Often the body just says, I don't know what to do with this. Let's just break it down and store it as fat. Fat's good because, for thousands and 10,000s of years of our history, we needed fat, pure and simple.
Mm,
Starving to death was our biggest concern,
sure.
right? So
Definitely. Yeah.
our whole metabolism is, if we fed the brain and we fed the muscles, store that stuff, right? The more fat we have stored, the safer we're going to be if we don't find food for the next week. So what our bodies do is convert things it doesn't recognize but are still digestible to fat. So in processed food, not only do we have the negative effects of refined sugar and the inflammatory effects, but also a lot of the ingredients aren't recognized by our gut biotics and system, which is converted by default into fats. It's stored for our own preservation. The problem is, as you know today, that we have too much fat.
Well, we're 6 steps away from food at any time, right? Like, it's not like when we grew up, right? It's not, or ancestrally how we would forage for food. I mean, we might eat several hours between meals, right? But now that doesn't happen like, I mean, it's choice, right? It's a choice not to eat because otherwise it's always readily available, where in the past that wouldn't have been a choice, right?
And it really has turned things around because now people are doing a lot of research and practice of short-term fasting, intermittent fasting, and how that can help, sort of reset our body. I was going to just say one more thing about the fat, something that I've found, people that have been listening know that I went through rapid weight loss and are going through it now, is that sometimes when I've lost a lot of weight quickly, I feel really, really nauseous, or I feel like I'm drugged. And I talked to them about my doctors, and they said, well, a lot of that stuff gets stored in your fat cells, things that are fat soluble. Actually, there's trace amounts of that in the fat cells. So when the fat cells are destroyed, consumed, processed, those are re-released into your body, basically as toxins. So not is your body just storing, and normally normal weight loss, it's, you don't notice it. But
It's
if
more
you're
gradual, more,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, right, then your kidneys have to process it, and right. which just goes back to the idea your body just, putting everything it doesn't know what to do with into fat storage. And along with that goes chemicals and preservatives and things that just are not good for our body and can continue to cause us problems as they're consumed and used. But going back to the foods that we should eat every day, and it really comes down to some basic idea. And like I looked at one list and it was chia seeds, walnuts, broccoli, leafy greens, yogurt, berries, avocados, tomatoes, mushrooms, beans, are something that we should consume every day. That was the scientific list of what we should consume.
Mushrooms are amazing. For your immunity, incredible. Carry on.
Mushrooms, and that people are really surprised by that one. You should eat mushrooms every day. And a lot of traditional diets, fungus is a natural part of not only every day, but almost every meal in some form or another. As a kid, we used to, they're called puffballs. I don't know what their scientific name is. They're out in the pasture, and when they die and they get dry, you can pit them and the spores come out of them. But before they die, they're a big loaf of spongy fungus. And we had an old uncle that taught us that you could pick them and slice them and fry them in butter, and they're delicious and good for you. And pastures are full of the things. But again, we're not, as you said, we're not taught to look for food.
No.
We're taught to go to the grocery store and buy it, which is problematic. Right.
I'm hoping that this indigenous fella that I've been chatting with is going to come to my place, walk around my place with me, and identify where there's healing plants and what this plant does and those kind of things. I'm trying to make that happen.
I'll send you a really cool little documentary in Japan, and it's an old couple that they're both artists. He's a ceramicist and she's a painter. Anyway, they moved up into the mountains, bought a little place in the mountains, and have lived there for 70 years, built their own little house, did everything by themselves. Still live in the house they built 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But to eat, they just go outside, and they do grow some daikon and some things that don't grow in that area naturally. But basically, he takes a bucket and he knows what ferns and plants and berries and fauna he can eat, and brings it in, and his wife washes it all up. They separate it out on 2 plates, and that's what they eat. Both of them are 90 plus years old and still going and doing, and
that's amazing stuff. That's amazing. Yeah.
Crazy. Anyway, so going back to the list of foods that you should consume every day, they really come down to omega-3 fatty acids are something that we need a lot of and don't get enough of, that are important for development, mood, etc. A lot of research published recently on magnesium, and magnesium can directly improve the symptoms of depression. Now, I'm saying that carefully because it can't cure the depression, the reason, the trigger for depression, but it can lessen the severity of the symptoms that people feel. So, and I think that's important too. We're always talking about getting help if you need it. Diet and exercise and all of these things can lessen the symptoms. They can make us feel better. But if we have a real traumatic experience, they're not going to cure that trauma, right? Sure. They might make it that you can live with it and live better with it, but there's getting help is important. But if you get help and don't change all these other things, you're going to relapse into that really easily as well. Okay. So just looking at things that, if you said, what would you recommend after all the research you did, what are the things that kept coming up to you? You mentioned vitamin D. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Magnesium is really popular right now in research and in mental health, nutrition things. And cumin in turmeric, right? Curcumin, I always pronounce it wrong. Curcumin, which is in turmeric, right? the yellow stuff
Yeah.
in Indian food, and black pepper. Those
Mm.
are two things that you can add to your diet quite easily.
Yeah.
In tea, I love turmeric and black pepper tea.
You
It's
just you just spray some on.
you can. There's I can send you a link. I can post it too. There's a tea growers cooperative in India or Sri Lanka. I can't remember off the top of my head. And it's a silk tea bag or a recyclable tea bag, and there's actually turmeric root and peppercorns in it, cracked peppercorns, and so there's no mess. You can do it, as you said, just add it in. The problem is the curcumin, which is the main active ingredient, but it's only one of 3 or 4. Again, Al and I are not nutritionalists and don't even pretend to be one on the internet, but it's one of the active ingredients, the main one, but it's hard for us to absorb, right? So people often take supplements, which arguably is better, but black pepper, and why I said black pepper is something, it has antioxidant properties on its own, but it can increase absorption of other beneficial nutrients by up to 2,000%.
Woo.
Yeah.
So there you go. A little bit of black pepper. Start adding that onto your meals. That's a great idea.
Black pepper used to be the king of spice next to salt, right? Worldwide, it was salt and black pepper, or that family of peppers, right?
Nice.
If you think of like my family that came from Europe, black pepper and salt was about all the spice that ever went on anything. But recently, if you go somewhere, there always used to be salt and pepper on the table. But I can't remember seeing a pepper shaker on a table in years. Can you?
Remember when you went out for the fancy dining and the gal would come out with the big pepper shaker to give you the
that's still, sometimes I see that, with a big pepper mill. But on your table,
obviously I haven't been out much to a fancy restaurant. I don't know if that's still a thing. So okay.
Well, I'm going on 4 or 5-year-old information myself. But yeah, black pepper is something we probably all have. It's not expensive. We can get our hands on it really inexpensively, and we don't have to, get as less chemically as you can.
I'm starting tomorrow. Black pepper. I'm adding it to my meals. Good job, Scott. Thanks for the tip. What are we wrapping her up here now?
We are. So I just want to end by saying that the message of tonight is that, and from somebody who has 2 different pill holders to remember all the pills I have to take, good health doesn't usually come from a pill bottle unless there's already a problem. Good health comes from your refrigerator, from your pantry, from the food we eat. And if we're careful, it doesn't take a long time to improve our mood, our mental health, our physical health, by being a little bit careful what we eat, and even just broadening what we eat and put in our food will give us benefit. The average North American eats an extremely narrow band of food. We dress it up, we make it look different, we may color it differently, but it's sugar, starch, in carbohydrates, fats, usually refined or processed fats. And we can get that in thousands of different forms. But in terms of micronutrients, in terms of probiotics, etc., modern North American diets are heavily deficient in those things. So give it some thought. Be careful what you read. Look for scientific journals, but don't throw out ancient culture's wisdom or that of your own family. Black pepper was always available at our tables. I was fortunate that I've liked black pepper. I include that in most of my meals. Now science is revealing the fact that black pepper has benefits on its own, but can help you get much more benefit out of the good food you're eating already. So
I have got the price of admission covered with that advice, Scott. Thank you.
You bet. So everyone,
for our viewers, you might notice this is Tuesday. This is not Thursday. Have we forgot how to read the calendar? No, just had other commitments on Thursday. So we moved up to Tuesday. Next week, we're back on Thursday. Right, Scott?
We are, absolutely. Next
Great.
Thursday, same time, same place. We'll be here. The a cappella Alan Friesen, my good friend, and myself, Scott Sweetman. Take care. Eat some healthy food, folks. And we'll see you next week on the Hopeifiers.
All right. Keep well.